Thanks for everybody for hanging around for this panel. It's called Changes in Models for Journalism. And really what it's about, though, it'll be very freelancing, is trying to figure out how we get everybody to realize that news is starting on a mobile device, on a phone, through social media, through friends' messages. And then people may find their way to a website and all these other places we have metrics for where people aren't starting from. So yes, what's that? Up here?
They just need to be closer.
Closer?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So any case, when I'm Brant Houston, I did write a book about changing models for journalism, looked at all the things that have happened in the last 15 years. I've been working a lot with nonprofit newsrooms and hear people talk about audience all the time. I think it's audiences. I think it's plural. I think we've got a lot of different audiences out there, even for one newsroom. So any case, that's who I am. And I'm really glad to be with these guys. They're going to introduce themselves.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. I'm Ryan Restivo. Let's see. I created YESEO, the Slack app that I built as a 2022-2023 RGI fellow that helps newsrooms with SEO best practices. Last month, it was up for an online journalism award, finalist in the category of excellence in AI innovation, lost to the BBC, but they own buildings. It's helped. It's been installed in over 500 workspaces. It's helped with over 13,000 stories. And the job as an RGI fellow is to build practical innovation that could be used amongst all small and local newsrooms and serve them, right? So I've been able to learn a lot about how people in all different kinds of newsrooms have used the tool that I've built, which is just awesome. So yeah.
Hello. Anthony Adornato. I'm the chair of the journalism department, broadcast and digital journalism here at UMass. Let's see, my background, the area of it is in broadcast news. UMass as an undergrad. I transitioned to teaching. About a little over a decade ago, I created a one social journalism class when I was at community college. It was one of the first in the country. And I teach that to this day. Obviously, it's evolved a whole heck of a lot since a decade ago. It's a super fun class to teach. And I also have a textbook coming out next year. It's third edition on the topic. And so that mobile social class is really kind of a test bed for our students. It's an elective year. So the students are learning how to pitch stories for multiple platforms and tell different iterations of that story for different platforms.
Okay, I'll start out with you, Tony. How do we need to change our minds in terms of how we're dealing with gathering the news and presenting the news? What do you think are the places we need to change? One of the things I talk about is we're scrolling again. We went from scrolls to books. Now we're back to scrolling. So, what's the mindset that you're thinking of when you're developing your class and you're writing your book?
Yes, I mean, I think in my book, but also in all my classes, I like to lay the foundation of you can no longer plant your flag as a broadcast newsroom, print newsroom, or all newsrooms are hubs of content, right? And we have to decide the stories du jour of the day, depending on our audience, our intended audience, how we're telling those stories. So I think making sure that we're approaching it, at least in my classroom, I approach it that way of, okay, who's our intended audience? What are the stories that are important for that audience and where are audience active and making sure we're meeting them in those spaces where they're active, right? Long gone are the days of, you can spend a year on an investigative journalism piece and publish it. The pathway to that piece is not just that print edition or the online web edition. There's a whole demographic of people who will not know about your good work. It could be an award-winning piece, but they won't know about it unless you're able to package that in a different language, in a different way for audiences who are not turning to traditional platforms.
Right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think that I'll riff just kind of off of what you said, right? I think that your microphone's gonna be fixed. Other than that, it's good. The ways that we changed over the last 2 decades, right? with the early internet and now into this era where we're talking about AI, right? We're going to talk about AI, I'm sure, because when you walk on the ground, everybody wants to talk about AI. It's more about like the things that I think some people have hit on this already. Like the things that are old do seem like they're the same, right? The issues that we had in the early internet, and now we need to think about how do we not repeat the same sins as the past original sin when we put everything on the internet for free and we said, hey, everybody just come add our stories. And now we've tried to think about that as we go through, getting through early internet to mobile to social and all of these different things that have come across. And now is this real test where I think one of the things that I think about a lot is how it's changed and search, because YESEO, SEO is the key part here. But search really breaks down that idea that we've always had, that we talk about when you talk about the paper, right? The paper, one of my good friends is always talking about the dead tree and how we love to consume it, right? We've organized all of these stories for you. We've made decisions on all the things that we think are important. And all of these eras have really tried to tear down that kind of structure. And we've curated our homepages. We've made that. We've ordered everything in the way that we think you should consume this information. And every wave has told people that people are going to consume things in very different ways. And we got plenty of people in here. Everybody has a different important number one thing. And that's what search is asking. Search is asking for you to give your most important thing in your information. So how do we make sure we're reflecting that back in all the different mediums that you mentioned, of all the different ways that people are going to consume our stories moving forward?
So we go back to basics. I think it was Wired magazine a number of years ago said the web is dead. I don't think the web will ever be dead or websites will be dead, but I still worry that people start by talking lots and lots about their homepage, lots and lots about how people get to their other pages. But I really think we need to talk about a little bit more, like if the first contact is going to be mobile device, it seems we've been talking about, our design is responsive, but our designs should actually be for the phone, right? And we work our way back to what I call our archives, which is a website. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pull off my experience teaching this. I mean, I have a heavy focus on the user experience in my class. So the first thing I look at with the content that my students submit before I even get into, how good is the video, the visuals, the captions, I just analyze the layout, right? Is it mobile friendly? Is it going to retain an audience on mobile, or are they going to swipe away? So I think that's a key thing. I think, in journalism curriculum, at least, I think sometimes these elements, the focus is so on editorial content, which is obviously critical, but the user experience is not something typically, at least in journalism education, that's been folded into a great extent. So I lean on that more and more. I think also you can probably talk more about this than I can, but the reliance on a homepage, oftentimes the first page that folks are coming to is the article page. So taking a better look at how the article page is laid out. I mean, obviously the homepage is still important, but if someone's being pulled into your content from social but because they saw something on social, they're on a mobile device, they're clicking the link and they're coming to that article page. So how is that laid out? And I think that's a key component as well.
Yeah, I can't speak to every publisher out there, but I know more that I talk to, they will be like, we're not starting our redesign with our homepage. We're starting at the article. We're trying to figure out how to make sure that's good enough, right? Because that is, like you said, the entryway for so many folks, right? And search and discover and all these other things that are aspects of that. People are going to come in to see our stories, and that's what they care about the most. And if it's not reflecting what they want, they're just going to leave, and they're not going to want to hear from us again.
Yeah, but what about starting with the video? Like, should your story start with
auto playing video?
And Instagram, snarky, this was our story or our investigation, and that could be the entryway into the story.
Well, but I think so. I think so. The way I think about this is, I think there is a bit of a trend. Like if someone comes across something on Instagram, I think the old school way of thinking was, okay, Instagram, for example, it's a referral to our website. But I think nowadays there's a bit of a trend of people want everything self-contained there. They don't want to click on something and go to the website. They actually want the Instagram story that's going to tell, there's an arc of a story they want there that's going to tell them meaningful information. that they can walk away feeling somewhat satisfied. And if they want more depth about it, then they click on the link and go to the website or whatnot. At least that's been my approach, which is actually different than a decade ago when I was teaching this topic of, I was very much with a platform like Instagram. It was all redirecting back to the website. And while that it's still important, I think users, at least some of the data I've seen, is they want more self-contained stuff, at least on a platform like Instagram, rather than having to go here, there, and elsewhere.
Right.
And it's all in service of the job, right? It's in, like you said, the service of the job, giving people information the way they want it at the right time. So like, I think I definitely agree with you. Somebody mentioned Vines yesterday, which was a fun flashback. Definitely brought back some PTSD cutting, like a lot of baseball vines like 10 years ago. You probably can't find any of them anymore. But like that idea that, hey, we're pushing somebody away from where we want to be. Well, actually, we're just giving them another avenue to consume it. And we need to really take that step back and say, hey, if they're going to watch it this way, they probably weren't going to go read the 1,000+ word long form about this. Maybe they wanted to only be able to watch the 30 to 1 minute documentary or vertical version of this. And that's enough. That's enough for us to get our information out there to people who want it.
And we've got lots of newsrooms now that the first contact is text. You know, that may be plenty. And I think that makes long form narrative journalists, you know, weep. But you can deliver stuff in a lot of different packages. My students are deeper into podcasts, not by NPR, but other kinds of, you know, podcasts, independent ones. So I think great point is you have to consider that Instagram or whatever is a self-contained unit when it comes.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the role of us, you know, as yes, we work for an outlet, but at the end of the day, we're the public is who we're serving, right? So this whole idea of they're coming to you for value, and I mean, the hope is that they're gonna, if you give them value over time, they're gonna stick with you. They're gonna be under your umbrella, and it doesn't matter where they come and consume your content, whether it's TikTok, IG, or traditional newscasts, but getting them under that umbrella in your brand, I think, is a key part of this.
And then you want them to be your supporter, right? If you're a public media, you want them to support you or another nonprofit, and then sustain them, right? Or if you're a for-profit publisher, you want to hopefully convert to subscriptions.
Right.
Is the kind of the era that we're into at this point. Yeah.
For-profit's an interesting idea these days.
Oh gosh.
For a lot of media. After all, you have the Seattle Times that has 30 reporters now that are philanthropically supported. And they're still a for-profit. So when you look at the various business models, we're, you know, still trying to figure that out. Broadcast will be fine this year because it's an incredible election year with billions of dollars, but.
Sure. And I think you know, I think there are obviously commonalities across the different sectors of journalism, whether you're more of a traditional TV broadcaster or whatnot. But, you know, I think, but that also shapes kind of the business model as well, right? Like local TV news is still doing incredibly well, but that's only because the baby boomer generation is consuming that, right? Once the, how can I phrase this? Once the baby boomers die off, the younger generation is not going to turn 40 and be like, I'm going to start watching local TV news. So the other shoe is going to drop like no, I don't know. The other shoe is going to drop on local TV news like it did for how the bottom fell out in the newspaper industry. It's just a matter of time. But I think, like, at least in the TV news industry, on the local level, there is, you know, the focus still, it's on social, yes, but it's still heavily on the TV product because that's still their bread and butter.
But we still have a problem in that so many local stations are now using national feeds. That's all another road we can go down. I want to skip past all that as I can. I don't want to keep getting drawn back. So my provocative question is, shouldn't we think of ourselves as streaming services? Shouldn't we just go like the newsletter is that you scroll through is a better shot. The Instagram and again, it sets aside, becomes agnostic about which media you're using.
I'll just go out there, try to be crazy. I'll go with yes for some reason. I'm not sure how I'm doing this yet. Maybe I'm channeling from yesterday with the Blank is the Future of Journalism, right? But I think a lot of streaming services talk about time. That time is really their enemy, right? The reason you're not going to watch any more Netflix is because, hey, you have to sleep. We only all have so much time in our day. So at the end of the day, I guess we only have so much time. We're going to be able to absorb information. And we talked about earlier about how we absorb information when we're listening to things. We're listening when we're on a run, or we're listening when we're doing the dishes. We only have certain amount of times and pockets when we're going to actually understand what we can. So I guess in a sense, we want to be like those services, but maybe not too much like them.
I mean, I tend to agree, but I think the $1 million question is, how do you make money off of them?
Right.
Right.
Right. Well, and we've got a quandary now because even the public broadcast model isn't working quite as well. Again, it's a baby boomer issue for right now. So is it subscriptions? Is it memberships? And with some advertising? I've been a big believer since I ran an nonprofit association, that you have 7 streams of revenue. I don't know which one's that year.
7.
7 different types, because one of those streams is gonna dry up. So I'm kind of in a streaming state of mind about these things.
I think we haven't thought about what the post subscription era looks like. I think it's interesting about your question about subscription, because we were in a very streaming subscription era as we went into 2020 and moved on. And then that has slowly slowed down because Wall Street, for better or worse, has wanted to see results out of those subscription businesses, and they haven't been there. And that hasn't necessarily happened or necessarily been assessed across this industry, comparable to what we have in the streaming side.
But
Right?
maybe you were thinking too.
But also, what are we going to do?
Too much in a monolithic way. For the big guys, that could be true. But there's some people making some decent money off Substack, or they might do their own kind of subscription. So there are a lot of different formats. That's why I'm saying, 7 different streams. That's a pretty good, thought process to have if you want to pay the bills.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of revenue, the revenue streams, I think it's a mixed bag for a lot of people, or a lot of places. It's going to be testing out, right, of like what works, what doesn't, because there is no magic bullet.
I did come up with a magic number though when it's working on the book. $5 a month. Now it's
Just
7
$5.
or 8.
Oh.
But it's $5 for something from Apple, $5 for Block Club Chicago, for a month, or a special newsletter. If you think about it, it was $5. I've now been corrected by other people. It's $8. That's the magic number now.
Well,
and then you try to scale that.
There's an interesting opportunity here, as I'm the one who keeps mentioning it, and I'm usually the one who doesn't talk about this a lot. The artificial intelligence era that we're entering into, because there are licensing deals, but that's also going to create haves and have-nots.
Yeah. Other thoughts about any way to find that magic bullet?
No, I mean, I think, I'll speak from kind of our curriculum perspective. I just think in general, journalists need to be more aware of the business side of things. And I think that's something at least I'm focusing much, much more in our classes, like to have an understanding when you're going into a newsroom and just interviewing for a job and asking those questions, and understanding, like, obviously good journalism needs to be funded. What are the funding streams? How does this work? And I think that's not something we used to integrate in as much previously. And it's a key component of, obviously being a journalist now.
And it's about making that direct connection to the user. It's about, right, I work for a local paper, a little further south of here. But one of the reasons I connected with them is because they covered something I was working on in high school. A reporter came in and was looking at something that we were doing. And that made me a connection. And I always remember when doing user research with somebody, and on the other side, right, she's like, hey, this outlet covered my girls lacrosse team so long ago. So what I do 10 minutes after, I was able to look in our archive and say, hey, this is the article, right? And she could see these are the kinds of connections you're making. People, we talk about like we talk about texting today. That's making genuine, authentic connections between these particular brands and people. And that's the connections that are going to sustain us moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that authentic connection is huge. I mean, listen, there's so much chaos in the world now, so much fragmentation. I think people are really yearning for a genuine connection. And so I think, over the course of time, journalists being able to build some sense of community among the people that follow them, subscribe to them, whatever it may be. I mean, the hope is over time that will actually, help
Well,
build trust in journalism and keep them as readers, consumers of the product.
Yeah, on the mobile device, the phone, quite frankly, I've worked with a lot of nonprofit newsrooms, and vetted newsrooms in the United States have gone from 20 in 2009 to more than 450. And that's with one big association, and everybody involved thinks about money all the time. But what I initially, when they started, they were trading content for distribution to legacy media. And I think that the great thing about a mobile device is you can have that direct connection with your audience without the intermediary. And I think that's a big hope in terms of revenue.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's a two-way conversation, right? If it's done right. And the other thing I want to touch on with this, it does relate to business models and building trust among the public, is the idea of journalists focusing on a niche, right? Whether it's environment or food or culture. I think, we've seen just with subscription models how that's such a huge moneymaker, right? And so I know in my mobile social class, my students actually, I have them choose a beat that carries with them throughout the semester, and they learn how to not just report on that beat, but how to do community building under that beat. Where do they go to find, the sourcing? How do they build that online in terms of a small following around that topic? I think that's an important aspect of this as well.
What do you think, Ryan? You're dealing with how many newsrooms now?
I mean, yeah, I think it just starts with story, right? For me, I for better or worse, like there are a couple words I don't like saying. AI is already one of them, which is fun because I get to talk. People love talking about it with me. But the other one is content. I think it starts with story. Story is really what matters. We're telling stories to people. Stories have always lasted beyond what we've been about before the newspaper, before anything else, before that. When we've been able to communicate, how do we survive? We survive by telling stories to each other. How we could, like I think about the nature is the future of journalism from yesterday, right? Like how do we actually survive? We put cave paintings up to tell each other these stories about how we could live and take care of the land. So I think it always starts with good story and how we kind of, and the medium might change, right? The medium, we only had newspapers for so long. We've only had printing press for so long. We've only had the internet for so long, but how it changes, or at least TV, right? How it's going to change, but it's always been about making sure we're telling good stories. Small news outlets, right, that use YESEO. I'm not trying to plug too hard, but
plug away.
I'm not. No, but they care about their stories. These are mostly small local outlets that don't have technology teams that are looking for something to make them more data aware. Hopefully, give them more information to make them make better decisions when it comes to serving their information to others. So hopefully, as long as that's in service to that job, that's great.
So before we go to questions, if you walked into a newsroom, a small newsroom now, anywhere, what would be like one or two things you would say you really need to think about this or change something that you're doing? I'll start with Anthony and then come back to you. Because, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think if we talk about local newsrooms, there are so many challenges with staffing and resources. So I think an understanding of their audience, first of all, and, in the daily mix of many local newsrooms like that, yes, there are plenty of analytics that help us out with that, but oftentimes it's the reporters are, running around with their heads cut off. And that information I think is critical to understand, like who is our audience and who we're trying and where they're active, right? The spaces they're active and meeting them in those spaces, I think is key. And also I think the idea that we have to be everywhere at once for every story, I'm not a big believer in that.
I think it's over.
That's over, right? It's like, how are we, for this particular story, what is the best platform or platforms to reach those individuals, and making sure we measure that as well.
So for me, it's some of the best ideas I've ever had have just been sitting next to a reporter and just sitting next to an editor and understanding aspects of the job that they're working on. What are the what are the obstacles that they're dealing with? That's how some of the tools that I've made in the past have worked, right? The first thing I ever built was just to learn. And then an editor came to me one day and said, what would be great is if we could just preview our breaking news email newsletter so we can pass it around. People could sign off on the copy edit and we could send it out to our users. So it took 2 minutes to build, but then they just kept using it and they keep using it. So I think it's just about thinking about all of the things that people are getting pulled in 7 different directions, especially when you're talking about small newsrooms and small staffs. And I wouldn't say I've walked into a local small newsroom. I've mostly been on Google Meet and Zoom with these small local newsrooms when I've done trainings. But I think it's just about thinking about those aspects and service of the job. How can we give them more information or just make them a little more data aware so that they can take that and use it in part of their job, and they can use that time, hopefully, knock on wood, to do other things, right? We want them to have hobbies. We want them to not have to worry about all of the things that are already uphill battle with them.
I think one thing I would say is redefine what breaking news is, because that would release everybody to have a bit more time. I think if you're lost in the old ways, you just think you've got to be everywhere at once, and there's no way you can do that, and you don't need to be. And so that's one of the things I'm always saying. Journalism is finding time, making time, getting time, saving time. It's all about time. We've done really well. We'll just leave it out here that AI can really help this situation.
Oh man,
We've had a
okay,
lot of
good, 'cause
sessions on that.
I thought we were going to talk about that more. It's good.
Yeah,
I'm the only
no,
one who brought it up.
No, I
Okay.
thought we'd just be counterintuitive on that too. This is a counterintuitive session. So anyway, thanks so much on this part, but let's hope we at least get a couple of provocative questions.
Oh, you need a microphone now.
Kind of a twofold question. Use your crystal balls. 5 to 10 years from now, how is the content producing universe looking in terms of, we've got fading legacy media, we've got growing public / nonprofit media. How is that shifting? Just how much deeper will newspapers crawl into the hole? How much
Newspapers they're gone.
Yeah, they're
Okay,
gone. All right.
let's just move on. I mean, they're still there, but it's not the model.
All right. So, what is legacy media and new media, for lack of a better phrase, look like? And then what are the delivery systems that content's being pushed out on? Be it social, be it you mentioned streaming, websites, just, who's producing what and how is that reaching the audience 5 to 10 years out?
I'll give one. And
Go for it. Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at things, I'm thinking with all the different, I love this conference. When I come here, I see all the new possible techniques I feel we hear a lot about in the future. And I'm starting to think that news and journalism will be more exciting if it's more participatory. And there's a very old film, it turned into a TV serial called Max Headroom. And people forget that Max Headroom actually started with pretty much the first mobile journalist. It was one investigative reporter trying to resolve while there was this big scandal going on with pensioners. But you watched him in motion. He was broadcasting live at that time. And I keep thinking, with VR, AR, and so forth, we could bring people into our reporting. That wouldn't be the sole way. But I think if you want to build an audience, it's like, whoa, where are they up to today? And they could basically tune into that. There are many other things, but I just feel there's we're moving towards more participatory stuff, whether it's documentaries, where it's texting back and forth, where, and in some ways it's the old way, but at least hopefully we won't be standing in the ocean waiting for the hurricane to kill us. But on the other hand, we would be more participatory, more, regular kinds of reporting. So that's one idea.
So I'm going to try to tell you that I don't have the answer, which is okay. But I think that the way you say it, one of my good friends, he works in digital media too in New York City, but he's also works in this Future Today Institute. He's a futurist too. So one of the things he talks about when you think about planning for the future is there isn't one true future. There's a lot of different ways this future can go, right? Like we did not foresee all of this generative AI stuff. I personally didn't. I was working on a project and 3/4 of the way through, there was this particular boom, had to make an adjustment. So I think it's about what possible futures there are and think about all the different possibilities that we have and being open to all those. And a lot of people here are talking about a lot of different possibilities for what the future could be and trying to think about planning for what the future could be. And then we're seeing as everything kind of continues to unfold what it will be.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm often reminded of a decade plus now of when, Twitter launched, Facebook, and they weren't created for journalistic purposes, right? It just, over the course of time, we realized, wow, these are tools for not just distribution, not just audience engagement, but also sourcing, a tips line. And I'm kind of feeling a bit the same way now with AI. Like, I really don't know what the answer is, but I'm also thinking that there are a lot of uses with that we don't know quite yet, just like back with the birth of social media. I do think, though, that I'm still very surprised, both in industry and in journalism schools, how it's still considered so novel that we should be telling stories across platforms, like we should be doing something on TikTok to reach that demographic. I think we need to get past that point. So that sometimes still surprises me, because that is where the audiences are, depending on the newsroom you're in.
I guess going off the participatory journalism, I guess citizen journalism model, but also TikTok, age of social media, we have influencers. I mean, I'm currently interning at a newsroom that outsources influencers for food, opinions, like all of that type of stuff to build that content, but also you're gaining those followers. So in that more collaborative model, would we look at participatory journalism, I guess? And if so, making sure we're verified, but maybe not like X or Twitter where you have to pay for it. How are you growing that, I guess? And maybe looking on a youth perspective, how do we make ourselves more verifiable to an older generation, and as we move to this more social media model?
I thought that was up your alley, but I think, no, I'm serious.
Yeah. So I guess your question, if I'm understanding it, is this influencer culture and building a brand as an individual journalist. Is that it?
Yes, but also like integrating that and getting newsrooms on top of it. Like I'm in a newsroom interning where they have depth to that, but it's very questionable. So compared to like more of a national or other standpoint. So I mean, it is something that's out there on the topic of participatory journalism.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the idea of branding as a journalist on any platform, sometimes that, I mean, when we think of branding, it's like we think of marketing, right? So journalists oftentimes have turned their nose up at that. But the fact of the matter is you drop anyone's name, whether it's Walter Cronkite or Anderson Cooper or whoever, and the first thing that comes to mind is the brand, right? And so I think if we are to get the younger generation, it doesn't matter the type of newsroom you're working in, get the younger generation under our tent and see value of our brand and our information, then there has to be younger reporters like you doing that kind of work. Or it's not going to resonate with the baby boomers, likely, maybe a few, but that's not the point of that, right? Like, it's a different demographic. So we have to focus on the younger demographic, which is the future. So, I mean, we are not, at least in my journalism classes, we are not teaching folks how to be influencers, but we are teaching our journalism students how to be journalists who have value in their community, who are seen as go-to people for a particular beat or just general assignment in reporting in general. And that they know, like, I can turn to Jane Doe on TikTok or Instagram when I need good information, when a story is breaking, or for if someone's interested in arts and culture, environmental stuff, you're the go-to person for them. And so that's kind of where my mind is in terms of the role of this in newsrooms, but also teaching this as well for students.
Okay. Mina? Okay.
This is a hard question to ask because I've been asking myself this question for literally about 20 years. Don't ask. And I don't want it to end on this. But I mean, it was actually Vin Crosby, who for a while was a teacher here, and also he's a consultant, who convinced me that legacy media forms like newsprint and broadcast benefit from scarcity. Therefore, the business models, it can work, local can work. The internet is all about like huge scale and it's infinite. So then the prices come down and we get the digital dimes for, you know, print dollars and all that stuff. And I mean, what I'm wondering is, okay, so yeah, the newspaper model, you know, passed, you know, the last baby boomer one day will, you know, turn that dial off for good. But, you know,
That's
love you, mom and
Yeah,
dad.
but-
I will probably be part of that too with cable, you know. So, and it will be all digital. And I'm looking at news deserts, of which there are many, many, many. You know, if local could work in the digital, if the business model could work in the financial, I'm sorry, in the digital, you know, digital unlimited, you know, ad impression world, where then YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and all, you know, like they have scale, so they can afford that locally. I mean, if you're a nonprofit, yeah, you have to have the 7 business models, but why aren't we seeing that at scale locally? And if, you know, seeing that that's the case, do you have any ideas for how we could actually see something like Adam Harder's dating app for around local news, like applied to, say, video streaming network apps, right? Like, why haven't we seen maybe even just, you know, regional local, you know, Instagram and TikTok alternatives where all the news organizations are kind of working together, or maybe it's a bunch of Substack people like working together. I feel like everyone's trying to do this on their own, which also is not scale. And it just seems like a little bit of madness.
Actually, there's several words that have gone with this nonprofit movement, and the one of the biggest words is collaboration. And so you touched on exactly what has to happen there. Collaboratives everywhere. You know, you don't meet someone in this environment of the nonprofit news without saying, "Can we work together?" And you know, can you further distribute what I'm doing, and how do we get this story done? So I think you're touching on, you know, one of the things that's going to work. Yeah. So I do think this one-on-one model, the fact that we don't have printing presses is a great relief. You know, in terms of being a small newsroom now, you know, video cost is negligible if you're using your phone. So I think there's a lot of potential. I think we're just really figuring it out right now. And it's hard to be completely disrupted, and we're distracted, and we've got a lot of old ways still hanging on to us. But I think things are accelerating right now. I'm, you know, total optimist about it. When the web came along, the one thing I said to a friend standing there who was a newspaper person like me, I said, we're all broadcasters now. So I realized everything had changed at that moment when I looked at that screen in '94. And I think we're going to have a lot more of those epiphanies over the next couple of years.
Right. And like you said, like the world of scarcity turned to the world of abundance, right? And that's what devalued news over time, or at least these particular monopolies possibly lost a lot of their core value. But I think it's the news desert relates to, I think, the amount of newspapers in an area, right? So I think it's more about like the commodity of news is going to be served in some, like as mentioned Adam before, right? About how many different ways the commodity of news can be served. And people will still be able to get it all different types of news. It's just going to be, you know, so far distributed and different than what we've been used to, I guess, 20 years ago.
The only thing I'll add is like, I feel like one of the things I scratch my head about all the time, particularly on the local level, is the conundrum of like, okay, our audience is in there, it's in these spaces, producing content in these spaces, but making money in those spaces, right? And that's right. That's the conundrum. And then as we
Money
know,
that pays journalists.
right. And then as we know, when it comes to digital ad revenue, it's, the tech giants have a huge piece of that pie. So believe me, I scratch my head about this all the time.
And I mean the big social media stars, the YouTubers and the big TikTokers, they live somewhere, so they are local, but then their topics are, about everything but local, or it's more kind of lifestyle related. So I don't know if maybe that's a solution, but anyways, there's no solution yet.
I think
but it's like,
we're gonna
how do
get
we
to
get
this
out of
point that, and I'm seeing it where I live because we don't have a ghost newspaper, but we have a newspaper that's lost a lot of staff. And I see the pressure and the desire for people like, what is going on with garbage pickup? What about these restaurants? This thing seems to get closed down all the time. And what were those shots fired? And I think at a certain point, if you don't want to make a ton of money, you're going to be able to make a living being a reliable news source that people know about and actually know where you are and why you care about the place. I think that pressure is finally building. Remember, 3 years ago, according to the Pew Center, almost everyone thought newspapers were in great financial shape. Anybody not in the industry. The public thought newspapers were doing just fine. And then everything started to drop out. Now, I've got lots of friends around where I live, and they are really worried about getting any news at all. They're just hey, there's a demand. So anything else? Any other questions?
This is kind of a question, kind of just a contribution, I guess, is something that we hear from our weird perspective that you guys have lent obviously noted. We're kind of sitting in a weird corner of this greater conversation. And it's something I guess we've just kind of fallen into now, but it's a bigger theme that I think we're all kind of teetering on the edge of without fully realizing yet, which is the idea that like people have come to us and said, I would just wish there was a place where I could I actually ready to start over there. They started the conversation that we've heard here usually starts with TikTok or Instagram, which is there's a lot of journalists on TikTok or Instagram doing great work, but there's an equal amount of nonsense. And I just wish I could let my guard down. I wish I don't want to have to I might see for every great journalist I see doing real story, I might see someone parading around in almost a journalistic fashion, pretending they know what they're talking about, and that's fooling 8 out of 10 people in the room. And I think there's something there. There's an economy of leading from the front on a safe haven for truth. And so I think just the only reason I can think of an example is kind of applying it to this is we're thinking of long term that being a differentiator, and I think we can all kind of do that, which is, hey, you know what? You want your quick engaging TikTok content that's entertaining, that maybe is peppered in with some truth, but also you're taking a risk there. Fine. But if you ever just want to be like, where do I just want to go to get informed real quick? Go there. In our case, go to a press, right? It's go to those places where the differentiator at this point is our expertise. And I think local journalists that can apply to too, right? Maybe your beat isn't so relevant in Omaha for people in Reno, but if you can form that sort of differentiator of all the noise of the world, you still got us and we got your back. That I think weirdly becomes a premium service in the digital age. There's a future there if you can kind of put it in the right place and package it properly. And I actually think there's a lot of money there too.
I agree. There.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Gary, all set? Okay. Well, we're going to close it down. I like closing with optimism. So let's get out of here before we start talking about the dark things. Right. Anyway, thanks everyone for sticking with us. And this makes it much easier to produce videos for classrooms, which we do when we do these videos. So really appreciate it. And thanks. I know a lot of people have been crawling in with whatever's going around, whether it's COVID or not. So I appreciate that people are rallied to be here. Thanks. Okay. Thanks.